Let's get it going here.
Recording in progress.
Welcome everybody to Theory Underground. This is going to be the second part of the political philosophy trilogy where Benjamin Studebaker has been taking us through the a sort of overview of the topics, themes, questions, and order of operations revolving around poll 7, 8, and I think 11. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and technically poll 10, since poll 8 is also poll 10.
What happened to poll 9? I want poll 9.
Poll 9 is not a theory paper.
Son of a bitch. Okay. I'll just say a couple things. First of all, for anyone who didn't already know, the reason we are doing this is because we're developing a course for 2025 taught by Benjamin Studebaker. It would have the rigor of a Cambridge course, but it would be over a much longer period of time, thus allowing people to do deep dives and then take breaks, and then do deep dives and take breaks. And so there would be, sometimes it would be a few times per month. Other times we would take a month off. And so it's not, we haven't pinned it all down yet. If you're really excited about the prospect of this course, then you're in the right place and you're doing it in the right time, because as long as it's 2023 still, you're part of the conversation if you're watching this. And so anybody's questions, anybody's contributions have a possibility of shaping a really awesome part of 2025 that will be happening at Theory Underground. What else will be happening at Theory Underground? I'm going to say a couple of things just before we get it going. The main one is that we have rolled out this Michael Downs seminar model. So the Michael Downs seminar model is just to say that Mikey's going to be doing at least once per month a research seminar where he lectures on the stuff that he's been researching. Sometimes this will just be like deep dives into various thinkers. Other times it'll be sort of more introductory overviews. It's kind of built around his research interests, and helping Mikey develop that has helped me better conceive of what it is that we're doing here at Theory Underground already with the ongoing research seminar that I've been doing with Anne. Anyone who's a subscriber, and this is all you who are present, for the current and the original subscription model will continue to get access to the Snellgrove McKerracher synthesis lectures, as well as something else that I'm rolling out, which is my own research seminar, where I will do deep dives into the texts that I am most influenced by, whether that be Das Kapital, Being in Time, Totality and Infinity, Husserl's Ideas, Bourdieu's Distinction, like these big kinds of books that I don't want to teach as a course. I want to focus on a chapter here and there sometimes, and do broader overview kind of stuff sometimes. And the overall goal of this being obviously my own research interest, but also to test myself and to see if I can't give a lot of you guys my own efforts through osmosis, so that you can be listening and working and getting a lot from it. And eventually you at least are somewhat situated in the field. And my big question is, and I think this should be all of our question, can you, by being a working class person with earbuds, get a better footing in a field than a graduate student who is basically just gutting texts and skimming abstracts? That's not the same thing as saying if you're a grad student at Cambridge who's going hard and has the relative scole like freed up to be able to focus on these things. No. We're just saying like worker versus graduate worker who's stretched too thin. Like who has the greater advantage? And considering the fact that you can spend 7 hours listening to Benjamin Studebaker or me or Mikey or Anne, and then you can repeat that a few days later and you don't feel stressed about repeating it. You don't feel, because you're just there to work and you're killing time. My hunch is that there's an advantage for you. And our goal in the next couple of years is to see what kind of a footing you can get in the field. Okay. And so that's the main thing I wanted to say, is that the Mikey Down seminar and the Snellgrove McKerracher synthesis seminars are what I'm most excited about for 2025, in conjunction with political philosophy. And then we've also got philosophy of science and philosophy of religion threads that will have either short courses, or I'm not exactly sure how those are going to go, but I've been having great conversations in the background with a couple of people who will be involved with that stuff. And so next week, Mikey and I are doing a lecture together again. This one will have a lot to do with Levinas and Bataille. And then August is coming up really quick. And Saturdays throughout August, I'll be teaching the first half of Emmanuel Levinas' Totality and Infinity. He's one of the few people in the 20th century who genuinely believes in the concept of the good. And he argues for the idea that ethics is fundamentally the first thing, and not ethics in the sense of like social arrangements. He's talking like he uses that word a lot more like how we use morality. He's saying that the moral relationship between human beings, that thou shalt not kill, invoked by the actual face of the other, that is the foundation of all of these ethical systems and all of these political systems. It's the only legitimation that they actually get. And if we get too far away from that, then we're fucked. And he's on the shoulders of Husserl and Heidegger, and he's arguing against Nazism, but he's also arguing against Stalinism. But he's not directly doing that. He's mostly just focusing on what can we deduce just off of this face-to-face experience. And so he stays within the phenomenological domain. He doesn't do speculative metaphysics. And I think that he's an amazing thinker who's a genuine challenge for all philosophers. That's coming up really soon. That's like, hold on, how many days from now? It's basically 2 weeks from now will be the first lecture. Okay, so if you haven't already, go ahead and get on that. And TU subscribers, you get 90% off because it's a course that I'm teaching. All right. That's the announcements I wanted to do. Anyone have any questions on that before we turn this over to Benjamin? A lot of you, this is just repeat information, but yeah, I'm really stoked at this point, and yeah, let's get it going. Also, by the way, Nance is back from his break, his little leave of absence. So everybody say hi to Nance, wave at him. Yeah, great to have you back, Nance. All right, and with that, let's turn over here to Benjamin. Welcome to the floor, man. Great to have you back.
All right. So today we're doing Paul 8, which is also Paul 10. It's Paul 8 if you're a second-year student at Cambridge. It's Paul 10 if you're a third-year student. But the structure is more or less the same either way. Many of you will have heard the basic structure last time, but for those who might be watching online, I will briefly run through the basic structure of a Cambridge course. So you have a very large number of topics. In the case of this course, you have a total of 23 different topics. Now, each of those topics has a very, very long reading list. So if we look at, say, the Hume topic, we have the set text, A Treatise of Human Nature, and essays, moral, political, and literary, with some especially parts. So some parts of that specifically highlighted, but especially essays means, of course, that you could and maybe should read all of it. Those are just the essays that you especially should look at. And the secondary reading list includes a general volume by Harris. It includes, several different sections of secondary reading focusing on different parts of Hume's thought. So you've got a section on philosophy, politics, and history in Hume, which is Bayer, Forbes, Istvan Hunt, Philipson, Robertson, Sager, Wright. You've got a section on moral philosophy, Cohen, Moore, Norton. You've got a section on politics and political economy with multiple pieces by Istvan, Pocock, Robertson. Then you've got further secondary reading where they go into even more depth in each of those parts. The number of pages of readings is, it's 2 pages, single spaced of readings. right? So each of these topics has enough readings on it that it could be its own course if you were to do it in a forensic way. So, of course, for that reason, nobody who writes a Cambridge essay can be expected to have read absolutely everything on all 23 topics. The way we instead structure it is that each student does 6 topics over the course of the year. For each topic, the student writes a 2,000-word formative essay on a question related to that topic. Those essays are written over the course of the year. About 3 of them will be written between October and December. Another 3 of them will be written between January and March. And then in April and May, you prepare for the exam. You do some practice mock exam questions to take the exam in late May or June. That's the typical structure at Cambridge. Obviously not something that we could do verbatim in precisely that way. So since you're only doing 6 topics out of the 23, it's more manageable. And since with the formative essays, you are not expected to have read everything on the list before you write the essay, there's some scope for experimentation, and the formative essays are not given a grade. However, there's usually a lot of pressure on students to write them because if they don't write them, they will be inadequately prepared for the exam. And because for each one of those formative essays, you get a meeting, an hour long, 1-to-1, or perhaps in a pair, maybe with 3 people, depending on how popular the topic is and how your supervisor has things organized, with an academic at Cambridge who is an expert in political theory. And that person is going to have a conversation with you in some depth, and you'll have an opportunity to ask questions about the topic. And that conversation will be much more useful to you if you've done the work. And you'll be at a competitive disadvantage, and you might be a little embarrassed if you go into that conversation and you haven't done as much reading as you can do prior to that conversation. Now, on the exam itself, you're only asked to answer on 3 topics. And oftentimes, students will prepare 4 or 5 of the 6 topics they started with, so they have some flexibility going into the exam with regard to which questions they answer. All of these history of political thought papers are divided into a section A and a section B. Section A focuses on individual theorists. So it's done more in a kind of University of Chicago style with a focus on a particular text or handful of texts by one person. The section B topics have more general descriptions. They include 4, 5, 6 different theorists from a period, and their aim is to give you a flavor for a time, for a debate, for a context. They're done more in the style of a Cambridge school topic. Now, because the section B topics include so many more theorists and they try to give you a sense of place, they are more challenging. It takes more reading to adequately prepare a section B topic. And for that reason, on the exam, there is a rule that you have to do at least 1 of your 3 answers from section B. In practice, most students will do 2 from A and 1 from B so that their workload is manageable. Now, some supervisors will make restrictions. They'll say you can only do certain topics because those are the topics they're most comfortable with. It was always my policy to make an effort to assimilate a topic that my students wanted to do. If I had students wanting to do somebody I wouldn't ordinarily want to read or enjoy reading, I'd make a point to do them. So over the course of my time at Cambridge, I got practice on a lot of topics. On this paper, there are, again, some kind of recommended paths, combinations of topics you might do that are thematically related. So to run you through some of these paths, you've got sociability and commercial society in the Enlightenment, which would have a combination of, say, natural law and history, Montesquieu, Hume, Rousseau, Smith, and then luxury and commercial society. You've got republicanism and political thought, which includes Montesquieu, Hume, Rousseau, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and Wollstonecraft. You've got critics of social contract theory, which includes Hume, Burke, gender and political thought, Wollstonecraft, Bentham, and then social science and political thought. You've got Toward Perpetual Peace, which goes luxury and commercial society, then Rousseau, then Smith, then Kant, then Benjamin Constant, then nationalism and the state. You've got Consequences of the French Revolution, which goes Rousseau and the French Revolution, then Burke, then Constant, then Alexis de Tocqueville, then Nationalism in the State. You've got German Ideas of Freedom, which goes Rousseau, Kant, Culture and Aesthetic Politics in Germany, Nationalism in the State, Hegel, and then Marx. You've got the background to Marx, which is Rousseau, Smith, French Revolution, Hegel, Socialism before 1848, and then Marx. And you've got Progress and Civilization in 19th Century Thought, which is Gender and Political Thought or Social Science, followed by Hegel, then Marx, then Tocqueville, then Mill, and then Empire and Civilization. Now, those are just 8 different paths. And some students would want to do something else. They'd want to combine topics in a different way, and that would be perfectly fine by me. Now, one thing you'll notice about this paper is that there are more topics than in Paul 7, but geographically, the range of topics has shrunk a bit. We're really only looking at texts now from Britain, France, and Germany. There's a little bit of stuff from other places. Vico, for instance, is in this. But for the most part, we're really getting compressed at this point to a very small region of the world. And this is because we are trying to zoom in on a particular set of traditions. That, of course, means excluding a lot of other things that were going on in other places. And that is one of the weaknesses of really forensically trying to study particular contexts, is that it becomes difficult to take into account everything else that might be occurring. There is a continuing debate within the history of political thought about how to do a global history of political thought that is not so focused around this handful of places. It's an ongoing debate because people want to maintain the level of rigor that they use to discuss Germany or France or Britain when they're talking about these other countries. But for the time being, this course is still focused mainly around those 3 places. But you'll see a little bit of other stuff. The American Revolution is here. There's a little bit of other stuff around the edges. In terms of the lectures, the way these Cambridge courses work is that you have multiple lectures, each of which would focus on the topics that they have most heavily specialized in themselves. So in the case of this paper, in the year that I have in front of me, you would have started with Tomaselli, and then Meckstroth, and then Bork, and then you'd have Ruth Skur, and you'd have Bell, you'd have Tom Hopkins. There's a number of different people at Cambridge who would lecture on this course, and you would find that some of the lectures would be more to your taste than others. And sometimes if you liked a lecture too much, you might start to parrot them. Do remember, if this is your first time, that the way that the grading system works is that if you give a good account of somebody else's view that shows that you understood the view very well, very clearly, and you understand why they preferred their view to the other views that were available, that's good enough for a 2-1, which is roughly equivalent to an A- or a B+ in the American system, depending on how good the 2-1 is. If you want to get a first at Cambridge, you have to say something original. You have to go beyond what is there. You have to at least say something that nobody in the reading lists has said, something that in some way extends or develops our thinking and commentary about the topic. Very challenging to do. But if you get a first, it's a strong signal that you have potential for postgraduate study. And that is why we make that distinction. In the States, where everybody tends to get an A if they just do the bare minimum, it's much harder to tell who really is a grad student and who isn't. And so what will often happen in the States is that people will start master's degrees or PhDs thinking that they're going to do something that it will eventually turn out they are not really equipped to do. And you get a high level of dropping out and a large number of people who will just accept a master's as a consolation for not finishing, attrition, and all sorts of, it's awful. It can be just awful what happens to people when they get lost. Anyway, the historical context, the background, the thing that always sticks out to me about this paper is that there are certain issues upon which, toward the end of Paul 7, there was an attempt to establish a consensus on. There was an attempt to say, for instance, what human nature is or what natural law is. These consensuses were never really firmly established. Even in Paul 7, they never were firmly established. And by Paul 8, they are clearly broken. You have a lot of arguing here about what is natural for a person, what is human nature, what kinds of states are compatible with human nature. And related to this, when we talk about human nature, we're talking about things like sociability. We're talking about things like how you acquire political capabilities, political qualities. Are these qualities something that require the state or require the church to develop? Or are they things that can develop in a more ad hoc process through, say, social associationism or participation in the market? There are really intense debates, especially early in this paper, about whether market society, commercial society, is compatible with becoming a citizen, with becoming a full citizen. And as these states are consolidating and as they are getting increasingly involved in trade all around the world and setting up colonies all over the world, there's increasingly an emphasis on commercial subjectivity, on the bourgeois subject, on capitalism eventually, but it takes a while for that term to really get going. Initially, it's commercial society that is the emphasis rather than capitalism, right? This question about, is that really compatible with becoming a citizen? And another way of thinking about it is, does the idea of the citizen itself need to change? Do modern notions of the citizen need to be more limited in scope because people are so busy with their private business? And insofar as this commercial society is something new that's brought about by the rise of trade, how does that interface with older notions of, say, the state? Is there some kind of dialectic or interplay between society and the state, or is something else going on? So as we move through these topics, what we will find is that there is just a very, very intense debate on these questions. And I would position the French Revolution as an important break point in all of this. Prior to the French Revolution, there is a certain enthusiasm that it might be possible to do something new and cool and interesting. And then after the French Revolution, there is a period where this is problematized, where theorists start to go, well, wait a minute. The stuff that we were doing before the French Revolution failed ultimately to produce a new kind of state or political system that works. And yet there was something true about 18th century theory, that there is a new situation that is not identical to the ancient situation. So what is it that's distinctive about this modernity? And this question about what is different between an ancient world and a modern world is very important to these theorists. What makes the Enlightenment different from what came before? Now, there are a lot of efforts to draw a firm line, and we can problematize those efforts. It's not obviously the case that there is this very sharp distinction between modernity and antiquity or the Enlightenment and what came before, especially because, if you'll notice, a lot of these theorists are reading ancient and medieval theorists. They quote them, they cite them, they talk about them a lot. A lot of their concepts are continuous in various ways with some of the concepts of antiquity. They are certainly drawing inspiration from readings of ancient and medieval thinkers. So when they make this claim that there's a sharp distinction, that's a claim that we can question. We don't have to take that at face value, right? At the same time, if we also operated from a kind of dogmatist position that everything is transcendental, nothing changes, then we would enter into this paper with such a high degree of skepticism about the kinds of claims that these theorists make that we would not be likely to get very far in understanding what they have to say. So as you read this paper, you should be open to the possibility that things may have changed in ways that require us to rethink terms and concepts. But you don't have to take as a premise that there's a fundamental ontological divide between the ancient and the modern, a big black line, drawn in Sharpie that you can't bridge or you can't problematize or talk across. Try to be both-sided about it if you can. I think that will give you the richest possible engagement because you'll be able to see both sides of a lot of these different questions. Speaking of questions, let's run through some sample questions and talk a little bit about what is it that's really going on. So to start, let's do the Hume question on the sample examination paper on page 7. Why did Hume deny that self-love provided the basis for political society? Right. So self-love is, of course, this Rousseauian concept that emphasizes that we start from our own interest in some way, or our own love of self, and that this is in some way extended gradually. You could also talk about this in a kind of Hobbesian sense, that we're interested in survival, right? And in preserving ourselves. Hume, one of the things that makes Hume interesting is that Hume emphasizes that we care a lot about our family and friends. Indeed, Hume says that the problem is that we steal from other people, strangers, to give to our family and friends. And that really the problem that politics is trying to solve is not that we are selfish, it's that we are focused on our own local near circles of concern. And that focus on the people who are closest to us ultimately makes it difficult for us to cooperate on larger scales. So for him, it's not selfishness versus cooperation. It's one kind of intimate cooperation against a larger kind of cooperation that is more abstract and harder for people to take an interest in, right? Fascinating question, because it invites you to talk about, what is self-love? What are we talking about when we talk about self-love? Are we talking about something like a kind of Hobbesian position? Are we talking about something like a Rousseauian position? Are we talking about both of those? And what is Hume's alternative to that? And why does Hume think this way about people? The next question, on what basis did Montesquieu rest his criticisms of despotic government? Right? Montesquieu is a theorist who, on the one hand, is still committed to monarchy, but on the other hand is against despotism. And this is similar to what we talked about last time, this question about monarchy. Monarchy is not obviously a despotic or authoritarian regime type to many of these theorists. There's a question about limited monarchy or constitutional monarchy that for them is a serious question. Like today, if we think about the British monarchy, it's a constitutional monarchy. But for us, that means that the king is totally irrelevant and has almost no role at all in politics. And indeed, if the king took on any kind of role, we think in some sense it would cease to be constitutional. But that's not really true. Really, a constitutional monarchy is just a monarchy where the king has powers that are in the Constitution that the king is bound by. The king isn't able to exercise powers that aren't delineated in the Constitution. You can have a constitutional monarchy that gives the king a very significant role. What makes the monarchy constitutional is that the role is still constitutionally defined rather than something ad hoc. So there you'd have all kinds of interesting opportunities to discuss, how for Montesquieu you can have monarchy without despotism. The next question, why and with what consequences for his theories did Rousseau argue that man in a state of nature cannot perfect himself? That is a great question about how we socialize people, about how we create people who are capable of thinking and acting, something Rousseau took a really sincere and deep interest in. And a lot of later theories that are about society, about social associations, a lot of socialist theories draw in various ways on Rousseau's ideas. So you would have a lot of fun potentially in that question. And we could keep going and going. And if there are people who would like to discuss specific questions or specific topics on this paper, I would be very happy to talk about that. But what I want to emphasize is that really the 18th century is a period of some level of excitement about something new maybe becoming possible, with some voices that are not so sure that this something new can really happen, some voices that have doubts about it. And then in the 19th century, the emphasis is on what does the French Revolution mean? Can we still realize in some way some of the ideas that came out of the 18th century, or do these things have to be heavily qualified? What kind of role does the state need to take on, maybe to make some of the stuff from the 18th century functional? What kinds of states are compatible with the ideals that came out of the 18th century? Or are all states an objective concession? Is the state necessarily something antique that constrains the revolution. And then, even within, the question of revolutionary states, there are these questions about republics and modern republics versus ancient republics, representative democracy versus direct democracy. There's there's so many things that go on in this course. So as someone who teaches it, I am always interested in what the students want to focus on, because in my experience, you have such a better time if the student is following their own interest as opposed to the teacher imposing specific interests, specific readings, specific topics. And so for that reason, I think from here, the most effective thing is to take questions from you guys and hear what in this paper interests you.
Right. I'm trying to get my headphones to work here. Anybody want to go first?
And would like you to reshare the doc.
Oh, and if you scroll up a little bit, oh, you can't see if it's there. Okay, I'll reshare the doc. Okay. Well, oh shit, hold on. What happened? I clicked clicked the wrong button. Made everything go away for a second. While I pull that up, so it seems like some of the basic stuff though that anyone who studies political philosophy has to know about is going to be social contract theory, the critique of monarchy, the idea that monarchy can be different from despotism, and then I guess theories of sovereignty. Like that seems like just what comes to mind for me as like what I don't have any special interest in any one of those things, but it's like, well, that seems to me like absolutely necessary. But I'm interested in if you agree with that, if there's anything else that you would put on that list. And I am super interested if Nance or Will or any of you, Todd, have like a specific thing that you're excited about. Yeah.
Yeah. So of course, in addition to social contract theory, you have the critiques of it. Right. A lot of the time when we go through this period, people think, okay, you just move from one social contract theory to another. It's Hobbes, then it's Locke, then it's Rousseau and Kant. But there are also a lot of theorists who think social contract theory is the wrong way to think about modern politics, that it misses things that are basic and key to politics, that it abstracts away from in trying to think about this as a contract. So that is one of the sides of this course that is really interesting. This kind of reminder that you don't have to think about this in terms of social contract theory, that's just one of the choices. And you have multiple different kinds of social contract theory too. You have, at least those four that I just mentioned, plus options to not think in terms of social contract theory at all. So that would be something that would stick out to me. I think for me, the commercial society aspect of this is really key because this leads into the discussion of capitalism. So the stuff about luxuries and whether luxuries are compatible with being a good citizen that we start with at the beginning and the discussion about Mandeville, this will very much culminate in discussions about socialism, discussions about markets and capitalism and what it does to people. So some of that stuff I think is really key. You can also take this course in a very German direction and obsess over freedom. You can do topics that are focused mainly around conceptualizing what it means to be free. The German aesthetics topic talks about the sublime and what beauty is and how these things can be understood in a modern context. So we even get a little bit aesthetic at points on this course. But of course, that's a special interest. It's not necessarily something everybody's going to gravitate to. But if you want to do the through line with Kant and Fichte and Hegel and Marx, you can do that kind of German through line. You could take this course in a very German or French direction. You could do just French theorists. You could go Montesquieu, Rousseau, French Revolution, and then you could do the guys who react to the failure of it, Constant and Tocqueville, right? And that would give you most of your courses in the French tradition. And then you've got these Scottish Enlightenment theorists. You've got Hume, you've got Smith, you've got John Stuart Mill, you've got the American Revolution. You could very much focus around the Anglophone discussion too. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do here. But yes, the stuff that you mentioned is, of course, stuff that you could focus on. In particular, sovereignty, the French Revolution topic is awesome for sovereignty because there's a huge debate in France about popular sovereignty versus national sovereignty. And then CA tries to posit constituent power as an alternative to thinking about, perhaps an alternative to thinking about sovereignty, although others have tried to classify it as a form of thinking about sovereignty. Fascinating debate in the literature about CA as a theorist. He doesn't get his own topic, but he's key to the French Revolution topic. And I think he has a very, for me, he's one of the most important theorists that's only on the B side of the paper.
Is this um the poll section in the trilogy that would focus on or where anarchism versus socialism versus conservatism as like major tendencies would be centered, starting kind of with Rousseau and Edmund Burke, and then would we bring in Bakunin and Proudhon and all of that shit like at this point, or is this would that be the next syllabus?
So the socialism pre-48 topic is the topic that has all the weird species of socialism that predate Marx. And so one way, of course, to do that would be to do Rousseau, French Revolution, socialism pre-48, and then Marx. And that would give you, you could throw Kant in there if you'd like. It would give you a kind of through run of that stuff. You have some anarchism on the socialism pre-48 topic. Some people think there isn't as much anarchism as there should be, but you do have some. I can actually let's look at the list for that topic, because I think that topic is, if you don't know what's on it,
Benjamin, I'm gonna give you.
It can seem a little opaque.
I'll give you screen share ability here, so you can share. You can.
Oh, so I could share it. Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. There we go. All right. Yeah, socialism pre-48. So we've got Saint-Simon, Fourier, Proudhon, Owen, Blank, and Engels. That's the core group. So you've got Proudhon represented there, but not Bakunin, because Bakunin comes too late to be on that topic. But yeah, if you look at how much there is, like, my God, look at this. So that's the core reading up at the top. Saint-Simon, Fourier, Proudhon, Owen, Blank, Engels, and then the suggested secondary. And then the further secondary. And then the further secondary is broken down by theorist and period and place. Jeez. And even some stuff to give you a little bit of Marx and Engels in their early work and their early reactions to this stuff. Even Herzen in Russia gets on here. Then they give you 9 sample questions at the end of it to help you think. I love this stuff.
Does anyone else feel a little overwhelmed by this?
Yeah. So like, let's say that you were doing this topic. What would it actually involve? So probably you'd get asked a question like, let's pick one at random. What significance did socialist authors before 1848 attach to the French Revolution? Right? The second one there. So you probably cannot, in 2,000 words, include all of the theorists that are in the primary reading in response to that topic. If you tried to include them all, the essay would become overextended and it wouldn't be able to say enough that would be interesting about any of them. So probably what you would do is you would pick out maybe the three of those theorists that you think are most important for talking about the French Revolution, right? And because you haven't read them before, you might make some mistakes. You might not pick some people that you should have picked. You might get the wrong theorists. That would happen. That would be normal, right? But you would probably focus in on three. And you would say early in your paper, I've chosen to focus on these theorists because they have the most to say. These other theorists are less focused on the French Revolution and perhaps more focused on other things, right? And so then you would draw connections between these different lines of thinking in the French Revolution. And if you were really with it, you might find ways to put them in conversation with each other and talk about how the French Revolution as a context affected all of their different responses and ways of thinking, right? So in your initial essay, you would probably cover those three, and it might be mainly just based on that primary reading. You might have very little secondary, right? Or perhaps you would pick some that you noticed in the secondary list are framed by the secondary authors as explicitly having had something to say about the French Revolution, right? And then you might lean on particular secondary texts that talk specifically about that connection, because that's the question you have set. Because you know from your supervisor what your question is before you write the formative essay, you can structure how you read the topic around answering that question initially. And that will give you some ability to decide what to prioritize at the beginning, which is why the supervisor's question is important. When I pick the question that I ask, I pick a question that is designed to get you to read the right parts of the syllabus initially. The stuff that I think is most critical to developing a base in the topic. And one of the differences in supervisor quality is how well the supervisor picks the question, right? You don't give students a choice of the question because that overwhelms them. They don't know which question to pick, and then they don't know what to read. You have to tell them which question to answer on the formative essay so that they have some guidance about what to prioritize and focus on. And that's the function of picking the question, right? Now, in the supervision, there will probably be stuff you didn't read that would have helped, and I'll point to that, right? And if you decide to do the topic on the exam, you have all the way until June to do more reading. And you'll only really very, very thoroughly have to do somewhere between 3 and 5 topics. So over the course of that whole year, if you're a full-time student, you have nothing else to do, it can be done. But it's hard. It's hard even for them to do it because they don't just have this paper to take. They're probably taking 3 other papers in addition to this. So it's a big job for them. And a lot of them struggle, especially because they're young and sometimes they're not altogether disciplined and they go out too much and they have too much fun. They join too many societies and clubs. They start getting on ball committees, you know, those Cambridge colleges and their end of the year balls where they spend too much money to throw these huge parties where they all go in black tie. Some of them have to serve on these ball committees to make these things happen. I'm telling you about this because if they can serve on ball committees and get this done, I know you can do it if we find the right kind of pacing. I know that we can. It's just a question of pacing it right. And that's a question that, you know, I need to be in dialogue with you guys about your lives and your time energy so that we can get the pacing right, rather than having an unrealistic expectation that's based on an image I might have of how you live, right? And that's something that we can be continuously in dialogue about, and we'll get better at finding the pacing as we go.
I wonder if we, so, I mean, because we are so different from these Cambridge students who, in a lot of cases, presumably had, I don't know what kind of high school experience, what kind of, preparation they had prior to Cambridge. If you pick your topic and this, that kind of thing, I just feel like maybe that's just better suited to somebody who has spent so long in high school, already kind of like they've already mastered like doing essays that are very limited in scope and have a very direct prompt versus us. So I'm curious, Will, Cesar, Lewis, etc. I'm curious of everybody's opinions, and Nance, I'm curious about all of your opinions about like what feels, yeah, what do you feel up to? What do you think you would be able to do? What do you think you would be motivated to do? Does it help to have Benjamin just go, look, you need this. If you're going to do political philosophy, you need to write something on this. Um, or do you get really excited about different topics and kind of want to go your own route? Like for me, it's kind of a coin toss, I feel like. So I'm just curious about you all. And of course, this we will keep thinking about this, but I'm wondering about your gut hunch here, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of the things that I like about gender, especially. That looks particularly interesting to me. But I kind of just like Benjamin to kind of push us in the direction where he thinks we need to go, really. Because I'm happy to kind of go hard into this, but I don't know about everybody else. But yeah, I got so much out of the last time. So yeah, I suppose that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I kind of agree that like I struggle with like decision fatigue and like decision overwhelm when there's so many interesting things. Like I just get almost paralyzed. And so having someone who knows the field so well and can point us into okay, this is a good starting point. This is a great place to start if you're not sure where to start. Like to me is the most helpful. So I'd be down for just wherever Benjamin thinks this should go and where we should start.
Lewis has his hand up.
Oh, hello. Yeah, I think to be honest, I'm really, really new to this. So if I feel like if you're giving us direction, it might be more helpful because so it's like I don't know what I don't know right now. So for me, it'd be like something quite a bit like early on base level. And I think maybe having the kind of having someone giving you direction can really help with that. Like, where do I start?
Yeah, I see the point. I think that so I can give lectures on more topics than each of you would individually do. And one way that that might help you is that we would have some weeks where you would get to come along and listen and you wouldn't have to have written something up. So that would help you break up the effort. Whereas if I distill it to 6 and we just do 6 and you have to write on all 6 and you all have to write on the same 6, we would go through it faster, but it would be heavy. And then we would probably also, there would be so many of you who had written something for each topic that I would have to really, to give you each the attention that you need, break you up into small groups, which we could do if there were only 6 that I wanted to do with you. But then I also think that each of you needs to hear the talk about the ones that you don't do. I think that is the case. So I think there need to be talks on more than just 6, but then maybe I need to talk to you, perhaps individually, about which 6 you should do and have a little bit of a discussion with each of you that decides to do this, which 6 are the right 6 for you. And I can tell you, if I talk to you a little bit, which 6. That I can do. But if I set 6 for everybody, that would be too rigid, I think. That wouldn't serve everybody equally well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I guess we'll all have a kind of different projects that we're working on at that time, so they might align with those, and that would be helpful to have a conversation with you about what's actually going to be helpful for those projects, I suppose.
Yeah, and there really are more than 6 topics here that are helpful. That's why it's not just 6. But yes, it's frustrating because there's an incompleteness. You know, unless you teach it, you don't do all of them, which is why for me the most valuable thing I ever did intellectually was teach it.
I have thought about how in the longer run over the next couple of years, I do want to give people opportunities to teach stuff, um, almost like, at university, it's very common for people to do group presentations or whatever. And I just think it's like, I've never heard of or seen at the university like an undergraduate put in a position where, nope, you're going to be responsible for a lecture on this thing. And I think that makes more sense than the group activity that everyone stands there around a PowerPoint slide and takes turns talking or whatever. It's just like, no, you're responsible for to tell me about sovereignty between these three thinkers. And then you'll be responsible to tell me about the main positions for and against the social contract. And then you like that kind of thing is something we could be playing with here. But I think it's definitely something I need. Definitely something that I would need. Yeah.
Yeah, the difficulty is that oftentimes the undergraduate students will butcher the topics at too early a level in their engagement with them. And that's why we do the intimate supervision, where you've written a paper, we discuss the paper, and we discuss the limitations of what you've done. Because initially it won't be good enough to be something that would be instructive for other students. But I do think in principle that if we went through all of this, over time, we might get to a point where we could create pedagogues. We could create people who are capable of teaching these things to other people, and we could spread it out.
Yeah, that butchering is actually something that I got super stuck on with being in time, because it's like it's enough for me to have read it 3 times and have read a bunch of secondary stuff and to be pretty sure about my interpretation. But then when somebody else is reading it for the first time and they're writing a reflection on it, and I'm like looking at it, I'm like, that looks wrong. And also it's confusing. But I also don't know how exactly to correct it. Like it was a problem.
Yeah, so there's a range of interpretations of a text that are plausible, and you have to give students room to have interpretations within that range. But you do want to correct students when they drift outside of that range into the realm of the implausible interpretation. At the very least, you want to confront students with elements of the text that don't agree with the view that they've thrown out. And that's true even when a student has a plausible interpretation. I might go, okay, your reading of this sounds like this secondary text, but have you considered this other secondary text? At the very least, in your essay, you want to explain why you have not decided to go with this other reading, which addresses the same material, right? So I might make you aware of some other way of doing it. And this is totally normal. Like, nobody writes their formative essay and it includes everything that there is to say about the topic, right? Each of these guys in the secondary list has written whole books, whole journal articles that are 8,000 to 10,000 words long, multiple journal articles that are 8,000 to 10,000 words long about the theorists they've specialized in. So your 2,000 word essay that you write will not be perfect. And it's in its imperfections that you learn. So we start from the premise that there's no expectation that you would have everything right. It's just a question of how interesting your engagement is.
Well, I feel like that makes it more complicated than, or I agree 100%, but doesn't that kind of throw a wrench in this expectation that people do something original in their piece?
Well, original has to still be defensible. And this is the tricky thing, right? Like if you always aim for a first, it raises your risk that you might not even get a 2-1, because sometimes you can go off on a limb somewhere and find that there really isn't anything underneath your feet. So sometimes going for the first is dangerous to somebody's grade if they're not really able to read the text well enough to pull that off. And that's why I sometimes say certain questions or certain topics are easy 2-1, hard first topics, and others are easy first, but maybe 2-2. There are some topics where there are opportunities to do very well, but they're more dangerous as a consequence of that. And other topics where they're safer because they're well trodden. And there's a lot of literature that has done them well. And if you stick to it, you'll be safe. And students have to decide how ambitious they want to be. And because these grades affect their job prospects, career prospects, that compromises to some degree the process. And many students play it safe and just play for the 2-1 a lot, which is a shame. One of the benefits you have is that you are not expecting this to transform your market position or your position within society. So you don't have to instrumentalize it in that way. And that frees you to be more experimental. If I tell you that you've butchered the topic and you'd get a 2-2 or a third if you submitted it, you can go, well, I guess I better try again. You have to take it like it poses a threat to you, because it doesn't.
The other thing that's coming out of Theory Writing 101 with Andy Ridgway, it's been this meta conversation about the genre of theory writing. And it seems like this is a particular genre, one that you're very familiar with. And on the one hand, I want to say, like, I think we should know how to write a solid Cambridge political philosophy essay. Like that's a good goal, is to know how to write in this genre. But at the exact same time, there is this other question that gets raised about the genre of underground theory itself, and what we're doing through experiments with the medium to take an ill-defined genre, one that's in its early experimental stages, and develop it into something awesome. And an example of something awesome would be Mikey's book, Capital versus Timenergy, a critique of Nick Land, a Žižekian critique of Nick Land, the book that I've been proofing. Anne has been typesetting it recently. And it's inspiring because basically what he does, I mean, it all starts with he does this an exegesis of Nick Land's piece on transcendental miserabilism, which is basically the best piece you can find from Nick Land critiquing the left and how, basically it's like depressed. It's depressed about any kind of technological progress because there's no real alternatives to capitalism on the horizon. So it's just a bunch of miserable, fucking sad people. Well, that's which is an aside. But the main point here is the way that he does it involves heavy sourcing of quotes. I mean, really, he reproduces the entirety of the piece by Land, but it's broken up by giant chunks of, several paragraphs to each paragraph by Land. And then he brings in quotes from all these other thinkers that engages with it. Now, Mikey's on this other level well, I'd just say, like, basically any of us. He's on this other level. So he's got this, he's situated in the field. He knows who's saying what. So he's able to bring people into dialogue in this way that I think a lot of us can't. But what I did in the last month that I was excited about was, while proofing his book, I kind of ran with that idea, but instead of doing an exegesis on a particular text, what I was mainly inspired by was like this, it's almost, I'm going to oversimplify just to kind of get the point across. It's kind of like going, hey, everybody, look at this thing that I've been thinking about. This is a question. I can't stop thinking about this question. And, I was going a little into this and that, and oh my God, look, I found Bourdieu saying this. Holy cow. Well, then he also says that. Well, and that just, Husserl was saying this, and I think that he was inspired by Husserl in this way, but I'm not exactly sure how much that influence actually goes. And so it's a lot more like this, instead of it being like the master tour guide of a field, it's more like, let's think about how, like, gonzo journalism, right? We're thinking about, what's the name of, is it Hunter S. Thompson? Yeah. Hunter S. Thompson's kind of journalism, but in the field of underground theory. So the point is like, you don't have to have mastered anything. You're also not necessarily having to come along with definitive claims about anything, but you are proving a serious engagement with a body of literature. You're drawing different thinkers into a conversation with one another, and instead of like arguing a thesis that you're either convinced of or at least going to play the part of being convinced of, you're instead like taking up the position of putting forward questions and then qualifying those questions over time, keeping them open, drawing more stuff in on it, revising as you go, so that it makes it like it. This style of writing is, I think, good for dealing with this conundrum between like writing for oneself for the sake of understanding and writing for an audience that is supposed to, they're supposed to get something from it. And the question and that question of, well, or the problem raised by the fact that most people new to a field are going to write a bunch of bullshit and they're not going to realize all these extra kind of interpretations, and so we don't know what we don't know. In a sort of sense, I'm hoping that we can kind of navigate the time energy lack issue, and at the same time find a method for talking about things when you don't know about them, but you're trying to understand them. Now, it's an ill-defined method, and it's not developed yet, but I am curious about everybody's thoughts, and I'm just interested in everybody's thoughts about how, like what I just described, or spin-offs, or counters, alternatives to that might factor in over these next few months as we conceptualize the kinds of assignments that we want to take on. I already said we definitely want to learn how to write a Cambridge essay. Like, at least I do. Like, I think most people probably want to be able to say, yep, I could write an essay that would get an A at Cambridge. Like, that's a good goal. But also this other question about the genre is the one I want to put forward.
Yeah, this is a good point. What I have kind of been thinking about here is not literally doing a Cambridge course, because there is a certain professional training aspect to a Cambridge course that distorts what actually happens, right? And I'll find myself sometimes reading an essay and I'll go, this is interesting and I like it, but I have to caution the student about what will happen on the exam if they do this, or I have to caution the student about what grades they might get, because ultimately this has to work for them career-wise. And that is the issue with professional training. Professionals, I have this piece that will be coming out for Isonomia in a bit about this problem of getting paid to talk. And when you're paid to talk, your private business is public business, and public business is your private business. And it mixes these things together in a way that perverts a lot of incentives. At the same time, there are very few of us who have some protection from those incentives outright. So in doing this with you guys approach this stuff as workers who are not trying to make a living by doing this. And because of that, I think there's an opportunity to do a kind of unity of the high with the low that cuts out the middle, where the stuff that's good about the high can be combined with the interests and goals of the low. So my aim here is to take this stuff that is usually used instrumentally to create professionals, and to instead use it to empower you to think about what you want to think about. And for that reason, I don't have to sit there in judgment of everything you say and go, this wouldn't get a great mark at Cambridge because it's not interested in the specific tick boxing stuff that a Cambridge student would be interested in. Depending on what you want, I can't emphasize that. If your goal is to write an essay that would get a first, I can say, here's what I think this essay would get, and I can do that kind of game with you. And as I get to know you and I get to know what you care about, all of you individually, I can do that insofar as you want me to do it, and not do it insofar as you don't. Because I really think what you care about and what matters to you, your values, what brings you to this is what's most important. This is really about informing that as best I can with everything I have, so that you can take it where you want to take it. But each of you will have somewhat different ideas about that. If I were to say, I'm not going to make you write a great, Cambridge essay that would get a first, some of you would go, but I kind of want to know that I can do that, because you might need that in terms of self-confidence. You might need that in terms of external validation. Some people, to even begin, need to be told, hey, you actually do have something to say. You actually are smart. You can read a text. And they need to know that so that they have a basis from which to act. And that is something that I think a lot of people who are autodidacts, who come at it from a working class background, some people really need that. They need that, the standard itself, right? Other people are not fussed about that. They have gotten validation in their lives in other kinds of ways. They don't need that. They have something else that they want. But then the things that they're looking to do will be different. They won't all be precisely the same. They might all be informed by a working class experience in one way, shape, or form, but not all workers have precisely the same values and goals.
I suppose, yeah, I'm really interested in bridging the high and the low. I think that would be a really interesting thing to do. I think that's a really, really good place to take this, because I think sometimes when you're doing this kind of writing, I mean, kind of like Hunter S. Thompson stuff, you want to make sure you've got that rigor as well. And that's really the interesting bit for me. I think that's where we have those two things together.
That's 100% how I feel about it. It's like what we're trying to do is something that is enjoyable to read, that is for the love of the process itself, but at the same time, super educational. Like going back over your own writing that you did that other people can also enjoy is going to help you. Like, I don't know, like if I take the 40 pages I wrote on a critical theory approach to sociology a couple weeks ago, and if I were to listen to it again, it's going to remind me of all the questions that I have about the field and this question of applying critical theory to sociology and the relationship between these fields and the scientific problems, the political problems raised. But it also, like, by going back over it, I become like it like refreshes everything that I have gone over. It like refreshes my, like, I'm not sitting here summarizing quotes is one of my favorite things about it. It's almost like a mixtape with my own interjections, or it is kind of like DJing or something. But the question is how to make that enjoyable, and like enjoyable for you as the researcher, enjoyable for other people who would want to be. It makes them want to be fellow travelers. It makes them want to get in on the conversation or get in on your research questions. And we are thinking like, this is a way of hijacking the pull that we all feel from the attention economy. We feel pulled to do something with this new medium because it's a part of our central nervous system. It's like our arms and legs. Like, we want to do something with it, but we also know we're being preyed upon. We know we're being turned into like embodied capital by it. Everything we're doing right now is well, we have to put a question over it. Is it reducible to the valorization of capital in our own selves as fallen professionals, or as workers who ultimately might have something to benefit from this kind of I don't think it is reducible to that, but those are the kinds of questions that we have to think about, and how the medium with its kind of incentives makes us want to rush things to press. That is ultimately what it is. Like, we all have like this desire to write a blog post or put a podcast series out or do a whole series of YouTube videos about the things that we're interested in, but we want to do it responsibly, and we want to do it more professionally than the kinds of a lot of what's going on at these state universities. So the question is well, how do we counter the worst tendencies of the attention economy while harnessing that pull that we feel, and come out with exactly what you just said, a rigorous
Yeah.
Hunter S. Thompson.
we have to find the love that's in people, and it will be different in each person. So we have to find that love, and we have to be sensitive to the variety of forms that it takes, right? At the same time, we want rigor in service of love. Too often rigor is instrumentalized and marketized. We want it in service of love. And so you'll notice this rigor and you'll go, well, is this rigor, just in the service of something banal? And a lot of the time it is. And one of our goals here will be to find what you really love so that we can put it in service of what actually matters.
Because this conversation is really speaking to me. My whole goal in this is to make a kind of a sort of a gonzo in a way kind of theater. And I've been involved in like collaborative theater for a long time, but I find that a lot of the artists in that field that are celebrated have a very mainstream liberal left, just a kind of a dead politics. And so my interest in this is, like you guys have been saying, like getting really rigorous um, about politics and philosophy, so that I can forget that all, learn it, and teach myself that, and then forget it, so that I can make some art that has some value. Because even these great, really talented playwrights, I feel like, or theater makers, often, unless they're kind of following some sort of intuitive path that accidentally maybe gets them to a place of like radicality, it always ends up being like a really self-congratulatory kind of identity politics sort of thing. Except for the very, very, very sort of genius talents like Carol Churchill. So this really speaks to me, uh, I feel like I never really hear this kind of conversation outside of this kind of underground online place, or like Y theory. Um, so I'm really interested in like an aesthetics, but also like the idea of commercial society, the idea of the good, how Enlightenment ideas of individualism, have led to where we are right now. So yeah, just to throw that in there, I really appreciate you guys, and I'm excited about this.
Yeah, one option you would have would be to do more B topics than a Cambridge student would typically do, because the Cambridge student is scared of the exam and doesn't want to have a bunch of B topics that they can't ultimately finesse. You could do multiple Bs, like the German aesthetics topic, like the luxury and commercial society topic. A lot of them will do a 4-2 split, but you could do 3-3, you could do 2-4. You get a lot of options there. And I definitely think that there's a lot of stuff on not just on this course, but on the one from last week that's relevant to art and relevant to making art, that will put you in touch with, I think, some of the other reasons people make art apart from the stuff that is so common now. So I hope it does that. I could definitely think of some topics that we could put in combination for that. Louis got a hand up.
Yeah, hi. I think similar to what the previous guy was saying, for me, I'm a filmmaker. I'm constantly thinking about the audience, my work, specifically when I'm making films. Who's going to be watching it? What kind of film should I make to help people understand certain things? And I think I don't really do much writing, but in terms of like storyboarding, I think a lot of the time coming up with images helps. And right now I'm working on a film that's kind of using a little bit of being in time and trying to help explain it to people who really have, no kind of like formal education. And I think maybe my question, I suppose, is like that towing the line between being rigorous, but at the same time, having something to give to a wider audience. Use kind of metaphors, but very simple things to help explain stuff. I found Theory Underground on YouTube. I consider myself now a fellow traveler, but again, I'm coming from, I didn't study any of this at school, at university, and so I kind of want to pass on what I'm learning. You know, as David puts it, it's like the kind of hose pipe technique. You know, it's just this huge amount of knowledge that's kind of thrown into my face, and I might get a gulp of it here and there. And I think that was a great analogy to explain where I'm at in my journey, and I kind of want to carry on with that. I want to help other people come to terms with some of this stuff, which I think a lot of the continental philosophy I'm coming to terms with, it really does affect our lives, you know. And I think that writing about that is something I'm really nervous about, but at the same time, you know, I want to be thinking about that audience. So I suppose, you know, that's kind of what I want to say about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Ultimately, we can't just be doing this for other bureaucrats and institutions like a lot of the professionals do. A lot of them are writing mainly for each other and not for everybody else. And that is a big problem. And I will be open-minded about different approaches you can take in an essay, different motivations you can have. You know, I may tell you what would work from the point of view of the Cambridge essay, but I am not going to constrain you to an exam system that you don't face. You know, if you want to do the exam, I would do it for you. You know, I would do a version of an exam and you can have one, but you don't have to do that.
Well, for the exam, is it are these questions that, you know, is it like you know, you get 3 questions in real time with a time limit, and this is like, these are from a list of like 50 questions that you had access to all semester, and they were randomly selected and assigned to you in the space of that time, or is it something completely different? Or are we talking like
So the trad Cambridge exam, the way it works, you get 1 question per topic. Occasionally a question will have an option in it. So sometimes a question will actually give you a choice of 2. But generally, for this course, for instance, you would have 23 questions. You will have not seen them prior to the exam. They will be new. So the sample questions give you a flavor of the kinds of questions that may be asked, but ultimately you will not have seen the question. You have to do at least 1 from each side. So you can do 2 A's and a B or 2 B's and an A, but it can't be all 3 from one or the other. You would typically get about 45 minutes per question. And in the old days, it was a handwritten exam. And speed at which people could handwrite was a factor. And people who had disabilities that affected the speed with which they could handwrite would have to make submissions to get extra time. And they'd have to prove to the satisfaction of the university that they were in fact disabled. And then they would get extra time or perhaps write to type. Now, post-COVID, there has been more acceptance of typing. And the usual rule for the typed exam that we did during COVID was 1,500 words maximum per answer on the exam itself. I noticed that some people, when we were doing the handwritten exams, would be, you know, very different in terms of the length they could produce. I considered 1,000 to be the minimum for a competitive exam answer, but some people would struggle and only get to 750 or 800. And those people, I would have to say, you know, for the purposes of Cambridge, you are disabled. You can't write fast enough. You need to get evidence so that you get the right to type or the extra time. Don't get your pride into a tiff about this. From the point of view of the university, you're not able to write fast enough. You know, and that's the kind of awful stuff that comes out of having to do a timed exam. So if we do an exam, you know, we can do something that's straight up like that. We can also do, you know, write a big long essay at the end of the year about the thing that you cared about most. We can do, you know, a variety of different kinds of things at the end if people would like to do things at the end. We could do nothing at the end. We have a lot of choice there. Don't feel bound by what they have to go through. It's a very stressful process for them. It sometimes causes mental health issues for them because their entire grade for the whole year is the exam. All of the stuff they do, their attendance, their good participation in the discussions, their formative essays, none of that affects their grade because we want them to be free to express themselves in all of those situations. We don't want to instrumentalize all of those situations to the exam. But the cost of this is that the exam counts for everything. And if you have a problem, If you're sick, if you're not healthy, you have to apply to sit the exam at another time. They might reject your application. People go to NHS doctors and try to get letters. All kinds of stuff happens as a result of that process. So that's something that I think in most cases, although if you're really hardcore, I will do it. In most cases, we'll want to change that, modify it, do something else.
Don't worry, everybody. If you tell me that you aren't able to do something, I'll just believe you. Because I know that I know nobody's holding a gun to your head to be here, you know.
Yeah, you're not competing to get
Yeah.
a job in the British civil service. This is not a desperate clamor for Whitehall jobs or jobs in the London Financial Center. It doesn't have those stakes, mercifully.
In a way, we might be able to go harder though, because I suppose it's really tied to people's recognition why they actually burn out at the end of the day, because they're kind of losing their potential recognition. Whereas we can kind of go harder and fail, and it doesn't really matter that much. The failures are more kind of interesting for us, I think.
Yeah, if you have what it takes psychologically, and this comes down to people, right? Because some people have enough external validation that they can fail at this and they'll be okay. And other people, if I give them a very hard time, it will break them mentally. And this is true with the Cambridge students themselves. Some of them have gone to secondary schools that have psychologically hardened them, and others have gone to schools that have made them vulnerable in various ways. And I have to kind of figure this out over the course of the year when I give student feedback, because I want to give people the feedback that will help them. And for some people, the amount of critical feedback they can take is different. And if I give the same level of critical feedback to every student, there are some students who would be unmotivated by that. There are other students who might be spiritually broken by it. And it's very challenging over the course of the year to find the level. I have to open the year at about the same level for everybody because I don't know people very well. And then gradually I learn and I taper a bit here and there. And that may be true for you guys too, because you all have your own histories.
Yeah, in the theory writing 101 course, Andy he told me a couple times like he's just not going to give people negative feedback. Like he's not going to say this. I think he's broken his rule maybe twice, but it's very soft when he does, and it's just kind of suggestive. But the basic thing is he'll just point at what you're doing well, and it's like,
yeah, I will not do that. I will give negative feedback.
Yeah.
I will give negative feedback. Absolutely. I will give negative feedback. My usual feedback approach is to be quite critical in the written comments on the paper. When I see you in person, I will be very kind and generous with you and very forgiving. And I will, some people would call it love bombing. I will try to take some of the heat off it in person and remind you that, I care and I'm trying to help you. And that's what's motivating the feedback. I will also mix in jokes. So I will try to break it up in the comments with memes and jokes and like YouTube clips to stuff. I do things to try to soften it. And also, if I give really critical feedback at the end of the paper, I give a long comment that's kind of a summary comment. And I will often make a point to give a little speech about what can happen from here and how you can improve and the things that will happen next that will be good. And I'll tell stories sometimes about people who have made similar mistakes in the past and gone on to do just fine. All of that goes into, you have to get people to raise the standards so that they don't struggle on the exam, right? Because if they struggle on the exam, it will ruin their life. At the same time, if you hit them like a truck, then they will be broken and then they won't do well on the exam because they were hit with a truck. So it's very difficult to get it right. The thing I always try to emphasize at the beginning and what I'm doing now is that I am really trying to help you. I am never writing negative feedback because I don't like you. That's never what I'm doing. And I try to make it clear to people that I care at the start. Oftentimes I would assemble them in a discussion like this about the paper. And I would say to you, now I can explain to you why we give you the critical feedback. It'll still work. Even if you explain how a theurgic ritual works, it still works. So I can explain why we do it. And we do it because we want you to be okay. Ultimately, So the purpose of it is never to hurt you. And if it is hurting you, I will back off.
It seems like a good sort of balanced way of dealing with, because there does seem to be like this, well, better not cause them any distress kind of just principle, and it's I think we all, at least the ones of us who've been to the university, are like, okay, but we wanted more of a challenge though, or at least we wanted more of this like honesty from professors. Like Anne always goes back to her best professor was a conservative guy who taught political philosophy, and the point is like he was hardcore. I mean, and it sounds kind of like Benjamin's approach is kind of similar to Yenner's, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how my political philosophy classes were the most rigorous, in the sense that all we did in the semester was read books and write essays about the books, and we got like actually thoughtful, critical feedback on these essays. The professor would just like voice to text his response and mark up a bunch of stuff. And yeah, like that's where I learned the most. That's where I improved the most, is by turning in a first essay that was fine. It was not my best work. And then getting the feedback and, oh, now I can, focus on that in the next one. And it's interesting, yeah, that one, it was the hated conservative guy who doesn't work at the university really anymore because he was canceled. But yeah, like I don't know what it is about the field of like political philosophy that motivates professors, that motivates students to like want to write quality essays, because you'd think, oh, well, sociology is, you could teach a class very similarly. But I didn't have a single class that I felt was rigorous in this way that it seems like these Cambridge courses are. And obviously, our state university is not Cambridge, but you can still run a class in a way that is reading and writing based.
Yeah, something I've noticed about sociology departments, and I'm going to make a generalization, which will not be true in every case, but sociology departments tend to be interested in critiquing order. If you have a critique of political order, sociology departments tend to like that. And they tend to be positive in the way they respond to it, as long as it broadly agrees with the general kinds of critiques that the people in that sociology department tend to make. And that can have a standard lowering effect. Not to say that it's true for all sociologists, or that sociology as a discipline is necessarily marked by that on an essential level, but it is a tendency I've noticed, and many students have experienced sociology being easier than politics as a discipline at many different universities that I've been to or been involved with. Yeah. Now, rigor ultimately is only possible if there is critique. There has to be a certain level of that. There's a film, Doubt, about a nun who is going after a priest that she is concerned might be doing something wrong. And she says that, sometimes you have to step away from God, but always in his service. That's what the critique is. It's me stepping away from God, saying something about you and your work, but in his service. Ultimately for the love that I have, the love that you have, in whatever form it takes.
So love has come up a couple times so far, and I'm just curious, like, how you understand the term. How has love become important to your political philosophy, or I mean, maybe it's just for your interpersonal pedagogic relations, but it also sounds like it has something to do with your political approach.
It comes out of my engagement with Plato. Really, when Plato's talking about love, he's talking about what drives us, what moves us, what motivates us to act, right? And so he'll make distinctions between people who love the good in itself, people who love status, people who love honor, people who love money, people who love pleasure. Love is a kind of ultimate driver and something that characterizes your soul. You can be categorized in some way by what you love, by what moves you, by what gives you energy, right? But ultimately, love in its highest form is about the good for Plato. Conceptualized in some way, applied in some way, and there's so many different ways to apply it, conceptualize it, but ultimately that for him is what everything is really about, not your status, not whether you make money, not whether you are getting off, but something more fundamental and more connected to the whole thing. And that's what ultimately causes me to do this. This is what I love. And you're all here because you love something that relates to this. Maybe it's this in itself. Maybe it's something else that this in some way ties into. But if we focus on what we love and we do it for that sake instead of the fear, we'll do very well. But the people who struggle are motivated not by love, but by fear. They're afraid of not getting a good enough grade. They're afraid of being lower status than their peers. They're afraid of not ending up with enough money. When you are afraid of these kinds of things, you don't approach the course in the same spirit. And unfortunately, it's not possible for me to ensure that every student is able to move in the course from the point of view of love. But in talking about it and in bringing these kinds of things into it, I hope to activate that in you insofar as it's there.
So I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts, and I know we'll probably close this out, by the way, everybody, in the next, anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes, but the big questions, have been like, what would a political philosophy course directed towards time energy research, what would that look like, drawing out of these three syllabi, and which, by the way, I found out syllabuses is just as valid as syllabi. So both are apparently okay, which is kind of crazy. But anyway, so these three towards a time energy theory, that's one thing. But also like these three towards doing underground theory itself as a question. And then the other one being how any genuinely critical social theory would have to do the kind of historical and critical political philosophy work that renders obvious the historicity of the political doxa of your time, right? So left versus right today, and liberalism and how it works, and all of our assumptions about individuals and groups, and all of that is part of what I'm talking about when I say the doxa of our day, and making it obvious. Part of that would just be like showing how some of this stuff we share with people throughout time for 2,500 years. It's not new, where in other ways it's like, no, there are things that we take for granted that are so historically young and contingent, and not only contingent, but also like likely will be different in the near future. Like that, those kinds of questions seem important on the CST, critical social theory side. And when I say CST, it's like critical social theory as like the sort of mother of all of these other, critical media theory and critique of political economy and all of these other sort of like areas. Those all kind of are bracketed by CST, but CST does get used in the literature today. For instance, Patricia Hill Collins, who's one of these intersectionality reader type academics today. She's about as celebrated as the name is escaping me, but the Harvard Law School lady who kind of founded critical race theory, Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah, so Patricia Hill Collins is right up there with Kimberly Crenshaw. Well, guess what? She calls herself a critical social theorist. And it's like, well, we all want to do critical social theory, but guess what? I think that Patricia Hill Collins thinks that what makes it critical is when it's identity politics, when it's DEI, right? And it's like, that's about the extent of it. And so bringing this back to the idea that the social sciences, the softest of the social sciences and the least rigorous of the social sciences and the most activist in the sort of liberal sense is sociology. This big question then would be, what would a political philosophy curriculum look like that is tailor-made to sort of countering that tendency? Let's just say that you've been through a bunch of sociology classes in contemporary state universities and you're nonplussed. And you're like, it's just a bunch of statistics and the assumption that all inequalities have to be remedied by a PMC that goes around scolding people about whatever, like this. Okay, well, what would be the countermeasure? What would be a curriculum that is tailor-made to counter those tendencies? That's one of the big questions that has come up for me in the last few weeks. I'm interested in what everybody has to say about that now, but also like, I want to get you all thinking about it over the next couple months here.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think that in some ways, politics is the anti-sociology, because politics is interested in what kinds of orders can come into being and exist and be sustained across time. So there is a kind of positive account in politics. There's always an emphasis on what can we actually do. And I think that's a big part of what makes political theory more rigorous, because if you actually have to say, here's what we can do, here's what we should do or must do, you're going to say things like that goes beyond just here's why what currently exists is bad or wrong. Now there are real standards that can come in about what's really possible, what really can happen. Is it the case that we can all be householders who engage in private business, who run businesses, and we can go to church and join business associations, and by doing those things, we will achieve a consciousness that is high enough that we can be effective citizens? Or is that not true? That's a really important question. And it's a question of time energy. It's a question of, if your time and energy is distributed in that way, will you have enough capacity for the state to endure and for society to endure? And for these things, if they are changing, to change in a positive way rather than a negative way. Will a positive dialectic result from that, or a negative dialectic? This is the huge question, I think, really about modernity. And it's a question of whether the decisions we made about how we tried to get people out of slavery, whether that produced something that can actually go somewhere positive, whether the emancipation can continue and grow and develop and become something better and richer, or whether there is something not quite right about the original theory that hampers it. And can that something not quite right be overcome? Or is it a fatal flaw?
So it sounds kind of like we could combine all three questions I raised pretty easily,
Yes.
actually. Yeah, but how it relates to the underground theory part. So let's say, so I just want to see if I can say this. So sociology tries to be descriptive, not prescriptive, but at the same time, in its descriptiveness, it alternates between relativism and, this sort of paranoid, any power asymmetry bad must be countered through specific kinds of institutionalized means. Right. And therefore it kind of just sits there spiraling in circles between those two things. Whereas this political science approach is going to say, no, we're not going to shy away from the prescriptive. We're going to make claims as to the ways that society can be. And we're going to do so on the basis of objective material relations of production that ultimately are based in the distribution of skills, labor, the division of labor, and the kind of time energy that some people get to have versus others who don't get to have it, or the different forms of labor power reserve that everybody is subjectivized into. Everybody's time energy is subjectivized into various formations of structured labor power, or at least the potential for it. And so then, so that would be like a way of kind of going in and kind of keeping this, the social theory thing in reference. And then how it relates to the being underground theorist, then we have like this sort of reflexive task of thinking, what does it mean to be a worker in the 21st century, where essentially the PMC is like, don't worry about it, guys. We've done the readings. You can just follow us and you can just subscribe to the right people, and then you'll be deserving just like us. And then of course we go, no, I wouldn't be deserving if I just subscribed to you. And in fact, I do want to think about these things for myself, but also I don't have the time energy. And by the way, PMC, you don't have it either. You're simulating the effects of having it, but you're also just stretched thin and exhausted. So like it comes back to this time energy thing, but then like the reflexive aspect of it is, so how do we then raise the standards on ourselves? How do we make it more rigorous, but at the same time not fall into prefigured modes and criteria for research that were determined and developed for and by institutions where it really was just about this sort of academic credentialing, this specific kind of authority having, and ultimately this sort of this narrative about civil democratic society and being informed and being able to make change by simply saying things, or pointing at things. Like ultimately the task is on us here to theorize our situation at the same time that we are just getting our education. And that seems like the time energy approach kind of brings it together. We basically get that through Marx and of course, like to some degree, Plato with the division of labor. And then through Plato, we can bring in like the actual passion driven life, love, and the life of the mind, which is ultimately, I think, what brings us all here together for. So I don't know. That's where my thoughts are coming together for all of this. Does anybody else have any sort of closing questions or thoughts, elaborations, anything else you'd want to add to this?
Dave, you're muted.
Okay, there we go. It looks like we've all had our fill, and we'll think about this some more, and we'll reconvene in 2 weeks for part 3 of this trilogy. And I'm really excited about how it's coming together, everybody. I'm also really excited to hear from any of the monthly membership that has been following along with this stuff, but who hasn't been able to make it to the live sessions. Let's just imagine that one of you has been following along with all of this and is getting really excited about it in the background, and you've got questions and it pertains to your project. And I am interested in all of your individual projects. Mike Crane shared his. I'm really excited about his. Like if you have some vague sense that you want to do something on the internet, whether it's a blog or a YouTube channel or a podcast or something else, I want to know about that, and I want to help you in whatever way I can. Like I just did a special session with Cesar, who's here in the chat. I just did a special session with Cesar recently, teaching him the ropes of how to use OBS, which is free software, to record Zoom calls so that he could do interviews and exegetical readings with other people. And that is available on the Discord somewhere. I don't remember where on the Discord, but it's there, and we can get that to anybody else who wants it. But also, that kind of thing is something that I want to help any of the monthly members with. Like ultimately, if you have some project like that in mind, then I want to help you with it. And if you're just like, nah, man, I'm just doing this to do it, well, then that's just as valid. And do let me know. And then tangentially related to politics and time energy, I'm going to play you all a brand new clip off my soundboard before we close out here.
And you don't have the time energy because you have to do other things.
Was that intelligible? Could you guys hear that?
Yeah, dude, that was fucking awesome.
And you don't have the time, energy, because you have to do other things.
And you don't have the time, energy, because you got to do other things. Yeah. So that was from his Michigan speech that I think he did like yesterday. I like tuned in for a part of it, and he just said, "You don't have the time, you don't have the energy," and I was like, "I'm clipping that shit right now." So, all right. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much, and yeah, we'll be back to finish out this trilogy in 2 weeks. If there's not already a Discord forum for the political philosophy trilogy, I'm gonna go make sure that there is. And so, and if there already is, then I'll send you all the link to it either way. Definitely get in there, because let's just say that Nance is walking around doing things, not thinking about any of this stuff, but then he gets struck by a intellectual lightning bolt and gets all stoked about some connection that comes out of today. Well, then I want that to turn into a forum post, because Discord's not Discord anymore. It's something new when it has the forum capabilities, and then we can also use voice memos. It's a different medium. It's a completely revolutionized medium than what it was prior to the forum and voice memo capability. But I've been wanting a social media site where we can use voice memos my entire internet life, and Discord's the first one to sort of pave the way, and the fact that we can do that in the structure of a forum is one of the best things that we have going for us on that. And so if you're not already on there, if you're not already using it, be thinking about it. Yeah. With that, thank you so much, Benjamin, for spending this time with us and for putting so much thought and preparation in this direction. We really appreciate it. We can feel the love that you have for this topic and for our intellectual development. And it means the absolute world to us.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming out. So much fun to do this. I look forward to doing Paul Levin next time.
Awesome. All right. Take care, everybody.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation: theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. What that has meant in the last year is traveling across the United States, into Canada, and then all over Europe to promote our books, courses, and ideas related to time energy and underground theory. You've been reading Underground Theory.
I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But Most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first I had to get freed from wage labor, which was achieved this year. That's right. Thanks to my monthly seminar subscribers, I was able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. Now I'm announcing the next big phase of the plan, which is the Mikey Down Seminar. What monthly subscribers to the Mikey Seminar are paying for is a survey of philosophy, including deep dives into Žižek, Land, Lacan, Baudrillard, Bataille, Lyotard, and ultimately the whole history of philosophy.
We're trying to build like this ongoing seminar, right? And that's what I really like about this thing, where, you know, if I'm teaching a main text, that's something I got to focus on. I got to really, but the seminar thing, we can do this stuff all the time where we dive deeper into concepts, we dive deeper into certain, you know, sections of books or whatever, and we can really do this nuanced stuff.
I think that there's probably no better way for us to accelerate our learning in these areas than by slipstreaming Mikey. And that has been my belief for years and years and years now. It's official. You're able to help out. You're able to get involved. You're able to benefit directly from liberating him from wage labor. Get on it right now. Do it. Just go. Stop what you're doing. Go click the button, subscribe. This is what you do. Subscribe to him. If you're already signed up for the ongoing Theory Underground seminars, then that's the ones that I do with my wife, Anne. Though that's getting an upgrade, which means that I will be doing one session per month that is just me, and then I will also be doing the ones with Anne, which are a crash course in sociology, anthropology, the social sciences, and ultimately Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Bourdieu, imminently critiquing pop psychology, sociology, self-help, and ultimately the doxa of our time. But if you would like to be a subscriber to both Mikey's seminar and the seminar that the Snellgrove McKerrachers are doing, then the best way is to become a Tier 4 subscriber, or you can be a Tier 2 subscriber to each of us. The reason this matters is because Tier 2 is like pretty much the best bang for your buck. It gives you huge discounts on all of the courses that we do. But if you can't afford it, Tier 4 is amazing because it gives you Tier 3 access at both Mikey's seminar and ours.
Finally, not everybody has time to be part of these ongoing research seminars, and they just want to fund the paid content for the YouTube and podcast. And so thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon. They're the ones funding all the free stuff, so big thank you to Bert, Marilyn, Carl, Sahil, Zozandra, Nikolai, Darian, Tyler, and Mandeep, and all the other wonderful Patreon people. And thank you to all the other wonderful Patreon people. Thank you so much to all of you patrons, and also to the special subscribers and the paying subscribers. Oh my god! It's just so awkward. Thank you, Patreon. Patrons. Thank you, okay. And to all the other wonderful patrons. Thank you so much, all you patrons. And also a special thanks to the subscribers on the YouTube side, as well as the paying subscribers over at Substack. Why can't we do this? Fuck. You guys. Please. Just thank you. Thank you, everyone, for making this bullshit possible. Thank you to the subscribers. You do it. You did so good. Thanks, guys.